Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. My name's Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by my co-host Gail Schimmel. Hi Gail.
Hi Fiona and hello to all our listeners.
I have been waiting for this podcast because it's a new month and I want to know if your writing hiatus is over.
My writing hiatus is over and joyfully so. I looked forward to the first of the month and then strangely didn't do anything on the first of the month because it was a busy day, and then worried that I was going to get caught in an inability to start writing again. But what I'm doing is I had finished a first draft, to use a technical term, a shitty first draft, and I am now editing that. And I am absolutely loving being back in a writing world that I'm sure about. I'm sure about this book in a way I wasn't sure about what I was writing before. And I'm editing in a slow and thoughtful way, which is not really me. I'm not a slow and thoughtful writer, but I'm editing in a slow and thoughtful way. I'm making myself read the chapter once and then add layers to it and then read it again. I feel like I'm peeling an onion and I'm having fun. I'm loving it.
It almost sounds like you're building an onion.
Maybe that is a better way of thinking of it because I'm adding rather than subtracting. So you're right. I am building an onion. I will think of it as I go back to my editing this afternoon that I am building an onion. What about you, Fiona? How has your writing week been?
It's been okay. I'm getting the words on the page. I experienced a slight crisis of confidence the other day. When it's not you having one, then it has to be me, I think. I had ordered some author copies of books that I publish independently on Amazon Kindle. And these books all arrived and I spread them out on the table and I thought, wow, I wrote all that though. Those are all my words on the page. And instead of kind of patting myself on the back and thinking, wow, I wrote all that, I had a crisis of, I wrote all that and I still have not met all my goals as a writer. And, you know, every step of the way, like I thought I'd be published by 30. I wasn't. I thought I'd have won an award by 45 and I hadn't. And you know, I kind of get there eventually, but I still have the sense of not quite being where I am, not quite having the readership that I look at all those words and I wonder, well, you know, what was the point? What's the point of all the stuff that I've written? And I wish I could offer to the reader a way to get yourself out of that. And I'm wondering if you have advice for me.
This is so interesting because I have my notes here, as we always do, of what we're talking about in the introduction to each episode. And in answer to what are you consuming, I want to talk about a podcast I've been listening to. And the podcast is about this. It's about being stuck.
Right.
And it's about how do you move on from being stuck? How do you remain motivated? It's a podcast called The Hidden Brain. The host is Shankar Vedantam. I think I said that correctly. And it is normally a psychology podcast. They talk about different aspects in every episode. But then once a year, they do a series called You version 2. And they will dig deep into a particular topic about self-improvement. And this year it is about being stuck. And I listened to the first episode and it talked about sticky middles. But sticky middles apparently happen in everything in life, that the beginning's exciting, whether it's a book or a race or a career, and the end is exciting, but the middle is hard.
Right.
And they talk about, and I think what you are experiencing is a bit of that feeling of, well, what have I achieved and how does what I've done meet up with my goals, and is it worth finishing and is it worth pursuing those goals? And I'm also feeling that a lot. A lot of what you're saying is resonating with me, but I found this podcast a really interesting, it's got techniques for breaking being stuck. And I'm hoping as I listen to the whole series on You version 2 this year that I'll be unstuck by the end of it.
Well, that sounds great. That sounds like something I really need because what I've been consuming this week once again goes back to Yellowface, which...
Fiona, are you going to be talking about Yellowface for the next 3 years?
It's quite possible that I will. But, just to give one's confidence an additional knock, one of the issues she explores in that book is who has the right to tell a story. So she creates a scenario where there are two friends at university and they're very close and they share everything. And the one friend undergoes an uncomfortable sexual experience that she isn't sure whether to place it as an assault or even more serious than that, or was it just something that got out of control? So the very fact that she feels so ambivalent about it makes it linger in her mind even longer. And she breaks down and confides this all to her friend. And the next thing she knows, that story appears in the campus magazine exactly as she told it to her friend, her pain on the page, but not told by her, told by her friend. And the friend never explains and never apologizes and accepts everybody's congratulations. And that to me is just so interesting and so fascinating. Whose story is it to tell? Do you have the right to tell absolutely any story that gets told to you? Do stories even belong to people? I don't know how you feel about that. Do you hesitate to take on other people's stories?
Well, I don't know that I ever do tell other people's stories, but I think every writer borrows to some extent. There's something we've heard. There's something that's put a seed. I have two direct experiences. The one where part of a motivation came from a case I'd read in my day job, and it was a very disturbing case, and I did give credit in the acknowledgements, but I do wonder if I had a right to use that, the imagining that it sparked in the way that I did, drawing on other people's pain. I did have thoughts about that. I have another one where I used a little bit of a friend's story and I got her permission.
Right.
But it is an interesting. What about you?
It's something that I've wrestled with. I've wrestled with it on the page. I've wrestled with it inside my own head. I think I do appropriate stories that I hear. Somebody must tell me their story at their peril because it will find its way onto the page. But I also like to think I will not strip it naked and put it on the page in such a recognizable form.
I think also one often doesn't really remember where it came from. It goes into your head, into a melting pot of ideas, and it comes out in a slightly different form, in a different way. I mean, when I say I used a friend's story, it really was the bare bone idea that I used, not her actual story. I think that's how writers' brains do work to some extent.
Well, I think so. And our guest today is somebody who goes to some very dark places on the page. So perhaps we can ask him about his inspirations. Our guest today is Ekow Duker. Ekow is the author of White Wahala, Dying in New York, The God Who Made Mistakes, and most recently, Yellowbone. Hi, Ekow, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Ekow, we are so excited to have you here, but we're going to just jump right in and ask you, and I hope it's not a personal, sensitive question. Okay. How has your writing week been?
I haven't been writing at all.
That is the part that I was worried would be a personal, sensitive question.
Yes.
Talk us through that. Is not writing the norm for you these days, or?
Not really, and I have been reading a lot. And I suppose that reading is the flip side of actually writing. So you may know that I'm one of the judges for the Sunday Times.
Yes.
The Sunday Times Barry Ronga thing. So I have to read a lot.
Absolutely. And that must be, I want to talk to you more about what that reading is like, because it must be a particularly intense type of reading.
Yes, it is. And I think in part because of the sheer number of books. And it always feels like you don't have enough time. You want to give each author the right care and attention. So it is intense from that perspective, yes.
And it's a long, long list, isn't it?
It is a very long list.
It's always quite a lot of books.
So when the long list is announced, have you already read all those books, or do you only start reading from when the long list is announced and you only read the long list?
Right. So when the long list is announced, you've already started reading the long, long list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then obviously you have to read every book, obviously, on the long list. And there must be that some of them are not in the genre you would automatically choose for yourself. There must be some books you come to and you think, can't wait to read this, Divine. And some books you come to and you're like, let me steel myself. Am I guessing that right?
Yes and no. I think it's actually been quite rewarding in the sense that the process has allowed me to read books I would not normally have read.
Yes.
So that has certainly been great, and I do enjoy that. Some books do I have to steel myself for? Yes.
I imagine, because I know when I'm on a panel, you want to read all the books, and some of the books it's part of your normal reading, but some of the books it's not part of what you would normally read, and often those are the ones you enjoy the most.
Yes,
the ones
sometimes.
that you come
you're
to
right.
by
Yes.
surprise.
Yeah, you're right. You make a good point there.
Yeah, it can be very rewarding to be made to read outside of your chosen genres. You discover this whole world of books that you kind of, as you would say, Gail, protect yourself from normally.
I'm a great protector of myself, Ekow. And it's a particularly wonderful long list this year. I think I've looked at it and thought, I want to read that, I want to read that. And then there's some that I have read. And there's some that I wrote. So we'll move on from there.
Ekow, when you are writing, what does your writing day look like? When are your productive times? When are you putting pen to paper?
So when I am writing, I usually start quite early in the morning, about 4 or 5 or something like that. Because I find that by the evening, I'm usually too tired.
Yeah.
So there's less happening in the house at 4 and 5. So that's when I usually write. And I don't write a lot at a time. I would write maybe for an hour.
Right.
So it's not so much about doing long stints, but doing shorter regular stints I find works for me.
With a fresh brain, and then you find that you get that good content.
Sometimes, yes.
And what would be, when you talk about shortest, and how much would you write in an hour? You know, some people write 10,000 words in an hour. Some people write 5.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I would write much less than that. It's usually about 2,000 to 3,000 or thereabouts.
That's a lot. Okay, I don't think anyone really writes 10,000 words in an hour. 2,000 to 3,000 an hour is extraordinary.
That is a huge number of words.
But that depends on how it feels.
Right.
You know, so sometimes it's a struggle, like I'm sure you know, and sometimes it's not.
Right, right. When you hit that sweet spot and the words are just coming easily, then you're basically just typing them down.
Yeah, so it often feels like when I'm in that space or that zone, it almost feels like you're taking dictation. Mm-hmm. And it's not hard at all.
Right, right.
And when you hit that zone, do you still stop at the end of your hour, or do you then keep writing as long as you're in the zone?
So I don't have a fixed time to stop. It's usually about an hour to an hour and a half. It's sort of like coding, where you're so much into it that you don't want to stop, but then something tells you that, you know, you're writing nonsense. So you should stop and you should take a break.
Which segues nicely into, you have a whole other life. You started life really not as a writer. The internet tells me you started life as an oil field engineer,
yes,
which makes me picture you in a kind of really, I don't know, on an oil rig, doing oil riggy things.
With the hard hat on.
Yeah. Tell us your origin story. And I know your origin story involves lots of countries, lots of careers, lots of changes. So over to you.
Mm-hmm. So I think the writing, and I'm sure there'll be people who have heard this before because I always say it, that the writing comes from my mother. She was a teacher and she always encouraged us to read. And when her kids, my siblings and I had kids, she encouraged us to read to them. The oil field plays a part in my writing journey because of where I was posted to. And the first country, it was actually the second country, but the first long country I worked in, I was sent to Libya.
Okay. And
from Libya to Algeria. So how the oil field helped the writing was that you have a lot of time on your hands in the desert. Like, there's not a lot to do in the desert. So that's where the writing started. And I started writing for the company magazine because they were always keen for the engineers to send in a paragraph. And in those days, you literally had to write it out and print it, and then you dropped it in the mail bag and it got sent to Paris. And I would write about what it's like to work in Algeria or what it's like to work in Libya. Most engineers did not write. And I remember going to Paris, which is where the headquarters was, for a training course or something. And the lady who managed the magazine somehow heard I was there. And then she looked me up because she wanted to see who it was had been sending her those things. So that was the first inclination I had that people might actually like what I wrote and how I wrote. So that's really where it started.
Okay.
You weren't that little boy who was just compulsively writing stories and always had the ambition of being a writer. It came to you a bit later in life.
Yes, I think several things have come to me fairly later in life. So I didn't really write when, I think when I was small, I see myself playing with wires and with tin cans and making toys and switching lights on or making little circuits because my father was an electrical engineer.
Right.
So I guess at some level I wanted to emulate him. So I didn't write. I was more doing like boy stuff with inverted commas. Yeah.
Yeah, stuff that one could imagine a young engineer being interested in.
Yes.
Yeah, you picture baby Ekow, the engineer, not the writer. And nowadays, for a day job, you're a banker. Is that correct? No.
I used to be a banker.
Used to be a banker. So take us from an oil field to a bank. Mm-hmm. How did that happen?
Right. So it's quite a traditional journey.
Oh, really?
Because so the routes from the oil field to the bank went through an MBA. And it's actually lots of engineers who do that. So they go back to school so that they can change a career and do something which is more in line with consulting or the business side. So that wasn't new.
Okay.
So I did the MBA in France and then moved to South Africa. Then I started working for Deloitte Consulting, doing consulting stuff. It's interesting that the first consulting assignment was at Eskom.
Okay. But you take no responsibility.
Well, I take absolutely none. It's interesting that at the time, and I do remember this, that the staff were very proud of the organization. And they would proudly say that they have the lowest generating cost in the world.
Wow.
And of course, things have changed a lot.
Well, I'm sure they still have the lowest generating costs in the world because they're not generating anything. And Ekow nowadays for a day job?
Yes. So from working for Deloitte, I then worked for Standard Bank for a while and also worked for Absa Bank for a while. Standard Bank was more of a strategy role, which is really about storytelling. The job at Absa eventually became a data and analytics job. And at the time I was head of analytics for the retail and the business bank. So that led to what I do now, which is I'm the founder of, or rather the co-founder of an AI startup that provides AI solutions and skills to organizations.
Oh, wow. That is so interesting.
It is interesting because you might know that AI has caused a lot of panic in the writing world. People nervous that their intellectual property will be scraped and picked up by AI and repurposed and that they'll now have no further control over their words. Is that something that you've thought about or worried about, or is it not something that touches on you?
Well, I do think about it, and I don't think it's that dire. Mm-hmm. So if you think of the advent of photography,
right,
it didn't put painters out of work. It maybe broadened their perspective and gave them another set of tools to work with.
Right.
I think that's what AI will be for the writing community. Though you are right that it is possible and actually very easy for an AI to write in your style or to write in your style.
I saw an article this morning, in fact, about a writer who has gone on to Amazon and discovered books written by her, which are actually AI-generated books under her name. But from what I understood from the article, once you start reading the book, it's really, really obvious that it's not her.
Right. So I have done the exercise before. So I did do something like that to see if I could tell which text was written by an AI. And once you start reading and you have an appreciation of the writer, it does become quite obvious which one is which. Though having said that, the arms race that the AI manufacturers or the AI developers are on suggests that the AI will only get more and more proficient.
Yes, yes.
So I don't have the answer to, so I don't have a certain answer to the question, will writers be put out of work? and I like to think not, because an AI really has no feelings and it doesn't draw on the wells of things that you would draw on when you write.
Yes.
But they are getting so blazingly proficient at what they do that they are able to simulate that. So I don't know what the long-term future is, but I'd like to think that we will never come to a point where we would prefer to read a book written by an AI rather than by one of you.
Gus Silber, who we spoke to last season, feels that we will always kind of know that we might not know what's wrong with what we're reading, but that a human being will kind of have an instinct that an AI book is not touching them in the same way that a human written book has touched them.
So what I spend my mornings doing, since I'm not writing now, is I play around a lot with AI. So trying to see what it can do or rather trying to see what it can do reliably. So I think that the technology is so revolutionary and it's so powerful that I do think at some point you won't be able to tell the difference.
And do you think your analogy with photography, that it might become an art form to be someone who produces really good AI books, who like oversees the formation and gives the instructions? Like photography has become an art form in its own right. Maybe overseeing an AI writing a book will become an art form in its own right.
Yes, I think you make a great point. I think, and I think you're alluding to what they now call prompt engineering. So how you talk to the AI to guide it and nudge it to come back with what makes sense and what you are satisfied with. So I see no reason why there won't be prompt engineering for writers.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that the people who work with AI and know it well are not in a panic and see it more as a tool, something that in the future will be useful to writers rather than something that's going to put us all out of work.
Yeah. I was reading an article last week by the head of Amazon Web Services.
Right.
And I think he described it very well. That, so he says that we are 3 steps into a 10,000K race.
Okay.
So no need to panic. No one really knows where the chips will fall. And we are all learning how this thing will pan out. And
it's going to happen, whether we like it or not. So we must learn to work with it and embrace it and use it as a tool rather than panic.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
It's like the cell phone. There's nothing we can do. It's here to stay.
Yes.
Ekow, you were talking about the human being who sort of draws inspiration for their writing from their personal circumstances. And I was interested to imagine you going into the banking world. And then in my mind, I saw you becoming inspired to write White Wahala, because it's kind of set partly in that world. Mm-hmm. Was it entering that world, seeing sort of aspiring but insecure young executives leaning on drugs to cope with their circumstances? Was it that inspired that book?
I hadn't thought about it that way. Now you mention it, I think that was part of the inspiration for the story. The setting I worked in at the time led me to fictionalize those types of people.
Right, yeah. Right. And you started off on a self-publishing journey with your books.
Yes, I did.
Can you talk us through that? Why you chose that? How many of your books you self-published? And then how you moved into becoming a Big Five published author? Because award-winning Big Five published author, part of the Pan Macmillan stable.
So I went the self-publishing route, I think, because I didn't know any better, and I was looking to be published. The self-publishing I found was quite easy, but then there's no marketing push behind it, and I didn't have the bandwidth or the time or the energy or even the knowledge, to apply the marketing to what I had online. So I think my first two books, Dying in New York and White Wahala, they were self-published for literally for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. Mm-hmm. And then alongside, I happened to meet Alison Lowry, who became my editor.
Right.
And then she somehow opened the door to Pan Macmillan.
Okay.
And I think that Pan Macmillan, in their publishing process, took my self-published works off the market, and they republished the physical version and the Kindle version.
And was there a lot of change in editing involved in that process? Was it frightening for you, having this book that you thought was already ready for publication? Because I know what having a book published is like, and editors are harsh and they make you change things. How much of that was there?
And it was a while ago, I don't quite remember, but I do know that I enjoy the editing process a lot. It's the part I look forward to the most, because for the first time, you're sharing the book with somebody else, and they're able to give you new perspectives. And my editing experience has always been, the feedback makes the book a better book.
I 100% agree with you. And I think being edited by someone like Alison is a huge, huge privilege. You and I have talked about that. At one point, we both had published, we were on our fourth book, and we'd done all 4 books with the same editor.
Yes.
Talk to us about that editor relationship.
So I think it helps to have somebody you know and respect. And I have a lot of, and I would say love and affection for Alison Lowry. I think that helps, so you know who is sending you the feedback and where it comes from. So I think once you have that, then the rest just falls into place, because she would never say anything from a place of ignorance.
Yes.
And it's always meant to help, and you take it in that light. So it's always been great.
I 100% agree. I love being edited.
Is self-publishing something that you would ever return to, or have you found your groove now as a conventionally published author?
I think I would still go the normal traditional route. Mm-hmm. And I do have a manuscript at the moment, and I'm trying to find an agent and a publisher for that. Self-publishing hasn't crossed my mind again, actually, until you mentioned it now.
Now you're suddenly going to go home and rethink everything. The agent-publisher route, I'm presuming from the word agent that you're looking further afield than South Africa for this manuscript.
Yeah, that's right, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And just for the listener, can you talk through why it is that why would you be looking further afield? I mean, I think I know the answer, but why would you be looking further afield, and why does one need an agent?
And I think it's because the market in South Africa for fiction is small.
Right.
The numbers speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think as a writer, you have this hankering to be heard by a broader audience. So maybe it's a bit of hubris, but you do like to think that your work can stand on its feet in an international market.
In your case, Ekow, without a doubt.
So why you need an agent, from what I know, is that overseas you can't, it's rare to approach a publisher directly. So you have to go through an agent.
And what are you doing to actively seek out an agent at the moment?
So at the moment, nothing.
Okay.
So I have been sporadically going through the querying process, which I guess for your listeners, it's sort of like trying to find a job. So you send your CV out there and hope there's someone out there who likes the one-page summary enough to want to see more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We had an interview with Amy Heidendrich, who spoke at length about the querying process. And I think for anyone interested in the querying process, that episode is a wonderful one to go back to. I've learned a lot from Amy and understood why I never ever found an agent. It all became clear to me when I listened to her. Ekow, you and I met, Fiona, I don't know if you know this story. Ekow and I actually met when we were briefly members of the same writing group.
Oh, yes, that's right, yes.
And Ekow came to this writing group and then wrote, like, we used to get prompts. Someone would be in charge of the session and give us prompts, and Ekow would write these unbearably beautiful pieces when the rest of us were floundering around and writing rubbish. But Ekow, that idea of a writing community and a writing group, is that something you believe in? Did it help you? I know it helped me with the book I was writing at the time, but I haven't done it since. What are your feelings about that?
Oh, I think it's great. And I think it's a wonderful resource because it helps you, to lift your head and get feedback and thoughts and hear what other people are going through. Because writing, as you both know, is lonely, and it can get to the point where, you kind of, so one can lose perspective. And I find that the writing groups and similar resources, they help to challenge you and to sharpen your craft.
Do you still have a writing group?
At the moment, no, I don't have one.
I haven't done it since that group, but the writing community is a huge support, I find.
It is, yeah.
I think having a writing group is a kind of stepping stone for many writers. It builds your confidence, it builds your experience, it gives you a sense of whether this is being well received or not. And then after a while, you get the confidence to sort of go forth on your own and do it and be a bit more sure that it's going to be well received. And I think some writers don't necessarily then step back into that space as well unless they become teachers of writing and maybe lead a writing group of their own. So it's a bridging process.
I think that is what it was for me. Ekow, you write in South Africa. You in that weird space of writing as a foreigner, and it's something we've spoken to other writers about. How has that been for you? How have you been received as a Ghanaian writing in South Africa and about South Africa?
I think it's generally been good. I have had some feedback from a lady from Tata, because in my last book, it's at least the first part is set there. And then she said to me, Tata is nothing like that. But she loved the book. Okay. So I do welcome that sort of feedback. And generally the audience have been very kind. They haven't really bashed me about, so they never say you haven't earned the right, so you don't have the right to speak about these places. It's funny that I write about South Africa because I was too afraid to write about Ghana.
Interesting.
Yeah,
and why is that?
But you do have Ghanaian characters in Yellowbone. I noticed you introduced them for the first time.
So that was my feeling confident enough to do so. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I always had this image of my mother saying, no, it's not like that. Mm-hmm. So it took me 4 books to write about a Ghanaian.
Is your mother still alive?
No, she's not.
That I do sometimes think, as hard as the death of a parent is, it sometimes does free a writer in some ways, that we're freed of that idea that our parents are going to be reading what we've written, which is a strange thing.
Yes. But having said that, she probably wouldn't have read it, but I still had that
voice
saying, so not wanting to disappoint her.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think that that's something you might push more, that we might see more of Ghana? Because Ghana is a rich and interesting and amazing country. It's something I'd want to read more about.
So I did that, not so much about Ghana, but the manuscripts I have and the manuscript I finished is actually about a Nigerian family.
Okay.
And Nigeria and Ghana are quite close. There's a rivalry between the two, sort of like the French and the Belgians. But the manuscript it speaks about a Nigerian family and specifically about a young Nigerian girl. But, so once again, the story is, set in South Africa, but I draw heavily on the Nigerian culture. And much of the dialogue is actually in Nigerian pidgin.
Okay.
Which is not the same as the pidgin we speak in Ghana.
And how do you research something like that?
Oh, yes. Some of it is through Google. And I remember speaking to Yewande, to help me with some elements of the Nigerian pidgin because it's really not the same. The Nigerian pidgin is more muscular. So I needed her, to sanity check that.
Okay.
And I'm interested in how you choose your narrative perspective, because I've noticed that you are almost never content with one narrative perspective in a book. You tend to do what they call head hopping. You occupy the vantage point of different characters to tell different parts of the story. Is that something you've always done consciously? Is it a choice? How did that come to you?
And I try not to do it, but I think I do it. I'm not sure. It's a hard question.
I think it makes the writing richer, actually, to have all those different perspectives kind of contributing to the narrative.
And I'm thinking of your question through the lens of the most recent manuscript. So there's the daughter, the father, and the mother. And they each have a different worldview. And I do try to bring that across. Yes, you're right. So I think I do that to give you hopefully, a more rounded perspective of this, of the situation where the story is happening. So you can see it from three different perspectives or four different perspectives. Sometimes it can be confusing. I remember there was a lady at the book club who said she found my book very confusing. So I guess it has its pros and cons, but it's something, it's a style, I think, that comes more naturally to me. Yeah.
I have never found your books at all confusing. I think there's something wrong with that lady at the book club. Ekow, you're also very brave about putting yourself into a point of view that is very different from your own. You will go into a woman's head, you will go into a gay man's head. How do you do that within yourself?
I think it's because I'm always attracted to the non-conventional, and you are right that I'm more comfortable writing about women and girls. I don't know where that comes from. Though I did do some years ago, and I forget what the term is, but it's this hypnosis where you regress.
Okay.
Past life.
Okay.
Thingy. And my past lives were always women.
That's very interesting.
So maybe that's where it comes from. I would much rather write about a woman than a man, though at the same time, I'm conscious that it's not what I naturally know. And especially going through the Sunday Times, reading all the books, it kind of it humbles you and reminds you that you don't know it all.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm. It's a brave thing to do, I think. I find writing men, I always pause a moment before I go into a man's head. I find it's quite scary inside a man's head.
Ekow, you are a very contained person in person, very measured, very thoughtful. You give thought before you speak. And then there is your world of fiction, which is almost feverishly imaginative and traumatic and terrible and awful and also wonderful. And it's just this, what's happening on the page doesn't match with the very contained person that we see face to face. Have people commented on that before? Do you think you are sort of, experiencing it's a form of therapy for you to put these things on the page?
And it has been mentioned. I think the most telling one was my, and I suppose she's still my business partner, but her husband read one of my books.
And nearly died of shock.
and then he got worried that his wife was in business with
a lunatic.
Yeah. So he asked her if I'm a violent person.
Okay.
So it has happened. Is it therapy? Maybe it is. I don't know. And I do enjoy exploring the parts of our lives that people don't talk about.
Right.
And are not willing to share because they'll be judged or whatever. And I guess a large part of that has to do with people's other desires. I wouldn't necessarily call them darker desires, but they're just, that in the parts of ourselves we keep to ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we don't think that they would stand up to the light of day.
Right.
And I tend to be drawn to that. Yeah.
And I'm curious, are you drawn to that as a reader as well? Is that what you look for in the books that you enjoy the most?
Yes. Yeah. So I do enjoy reading about people who are odd, people who look odd, think in an odd way, and do odd things. Because I think that the normal, the mundane can be boring, and it's something we live every day, so why not experience something else?
I'm always very curious about when someone has written beautiful books like you do, where everyone is an absolute work of art. Of your books, what is your favorite?
And I'm not trying to plug the manuscript, but I really think that the manuscript I have on my desk is the best one.
Well, that's no good to us, Ekow, because we can't read it yet.
Yes, I know.
So for the reader out there of the published books, which one? Yeah. I know my favorite.
And I would say Yellowbone, largely because it's the most recent or the last one. So I think I think that through the passage of time, I hope it's a better book, from a technical perspective. So I would say Yellowbone, and also because it's the first time I veered into what I later discovered was called magic realism.
Yes.
So that's something I enjoyed because I find that it's I wouldn't say it's a part of me, but it's something. It's something I lean towards. I lean towards that sort of thing in my personal life.
Do you think you are a writer who gets better and better with every manuscript?
And I'd like to think so, yes.
Okay.
And speaking of Yellowbone, what drew you to the issue of colorism as something that you wanted to explore on the page?
Oh, because it's so absurd. It's absolutely absurd that so much of our existence is viewed through the filter of what your skin color is. So it was really that. It was just the absurdity and the stupidity and the comfort of it that led me to want to write about that.
But as absurd as it is also very, very real.
It is.
Because it impacts deeply on your characters' lives.
Yes. I remember when I lived and worked in Nigeria, if you had if you had a light-skinned girl in the passenger seat, she was said to be your inside light, in the sense that she brightened up the car. So it's and I think it's something that all cultures do. They ascribe a value to your shade of your skin. And generally, the darker you are, the worse off you are. But you are right that it is extremely real. It's.
And I think has damaged a lot of people's lives.
Yes. And I remember growing up in West Africa, and I think it's something you've had here as well, where I think because of the societal pressure to be lighter skinned, you have women, mostly women, will apply skin lightening creams, which are nothing more than poisons. So they strip off, the first layer of skins, and it just makes you not good.
And do horrendous harm in the name of a mad beauty idea. Although,
Exactly.
I mean, I suppose there are lots of beauty issues that we could say that about. I've got strong feelings about
could be a
people
whole other
injecting
podcast,
poisoning into their heads.
What do you think would have to happen in society for us to be past that, for us to be in a post-coloristic world?
And I think we're getting there slowly. And I remember going to, long ago when my kids were small, so this would have been about 20 years ago. And I took them to a swimming class here in Joburg. And there was a little white girl who was walking with her dad. And she saw me and she said to me, you dirty black man.
Wow. Okay.
And
Did the dad want to die?
yes, he did. So he came up to me to apologize. But clearly she has learned this.
She got that from somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. But 20 years on, I don't think that happens as often. And I think that the change is slow. So I think that our kids are less inclined to say that, and their kids will be less inclined to say that. So I think it's changing. And it's just changing very, 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 very slowly.
And do you think that books like yours and other works of art in the cultural space are helping to raise awareness of the absurdity of colorism and maybe helping to change mindsets, especially in the younger generations?
And I would like to think so, but I think books, unfortunately, and I think that is just a small part of the battle. So if you look, for example, at the global advertising budget, probably less than 1% is African. So until those sorts of levers can change and can get pulled, we will have the phenomenon for a very long time. The change will be very, very, very extremely slow.
So you see the global media as having much more power than, for example, a novel?
No, I wouldn't say that, but certainly the global media has an important part to play because it's largely the global media that unfortunately shapes people's thinking and people's minds, and they have so much power and so much reach. And I think a book would need to be phenomenally successful to have the same impact in people's minds as a tweet from Elon Musk, say.
Right.
And that goes back to the need to be read by more people.
Yes.
The need to reach a larger audience and an international
I think so,
audience.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Well, I think we have come to the part of our podcast where we always like to ask our guests how they've been filling up their creative well lately. And it sounds like you have been doing a lot of that. So what have you been reading or listening to or watching lately that has had an impact on you?
And that you can talk about because it's not a long-listed book that you're now going to show favoritism.
Right. So apart from the long list, what I have been listening to is a podcast called Hardcore History.
Okay.
It's by a guy called Dan Carlin. And the podcasts are about 5 hours long. He has no guests, and he just talks. But he's such a good narrator that you don't feel the time. He says he's not a historian, but he just reads the very best. And it's such a fascinating thing to read. So the 2 episodes I've listened to, one was on the Atlantic slave trade. The one I'm listening to now is about the ancient kingdoms.
Right.
So the Persians and so on. And what strikes me, what has an impact on me is the absolute cruelty that readers then, and I don't think we've changed that much, but the absolute cruelty we display to other people. And in his context of the historical story, it was usually someone who has conquered someone else and what they do to the vanquished. Absolutely horrific. It's like crazy stuff. So, for example, a vanquished general would have to carry or wear around his neck the head of his former king and walk into the victor's city, knowing that you're going to be killed as well. Right? So that kind of thing.
I hope this isn't going to be colouring future books, Ekow. I do not want to be reading books about people wearing each other's heads into vanquished cities.
No, you wouldn't. But and it made me think about AI, which is what we spoke about, because we always say that we want your AI to be good. Right? So we talk about the bias and, need to write rules and legislation, to keep it on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
But when we think of how cruel humans are, is it reasonable to expect something that a human has created to be any better than a human?
Yeah.
What an interesting question. And there's a dystopian novel in there for sure.
There might be.
Well, Ekow, we hope everybody goes out and reads your existing books, which are published by Picador Africa. And we are very much looking forward to the new manuscript when it gets published.
Very much looking forward to it.
And thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great, and it's always great speaking to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gail, I was so interested in everything that Ekow had to say, and I have to reiterate again that in person he is such a different persona to what you encounter on the page. I can't be the only one who's ever made this observation.
He is. And it's interesting for me because I met Ekow before I read his work. So I imagine that if you read his work before you meet him, he comes as a bit of a shock because he's such a calm person.
Yes.
He gives off in person just this, you almost feel calmer for being in his presence.
And so thoughtful and so measured in what he says. And then what goes on the page is really quite a ride.
Fiona, what did you take out of that?
I think I was most interested in what he had to say about choosing different perspectives for his narrative. How he sort of feels as though maybe he should be telling the whole story from one perspective, and that there's something sort of wrong about telling it from multiple perspectives. But I really believe in the case of his writing, it is such a rich thing that he's doing. You think you're in this person's persona and you're going to experience the story from their perspective. And then suddenly another character walks on and you're occupying that person's perspective. And it just flips the whole script. It makes it so much richer. It just adds these multi-layered perspectives. Maybe it's all part of building the onion.
Building the onion, indeed. And it was almost strange how he thought he was doing a bad thing when in fact he's doing a very, very good thing.
Well, it's a kind of conventional writing advice, certainly not one that we've ever given, that you shouldn't head hop, that you shouldn't occupy all these different perspectives in the narrative, that you should sort of pick one and stick with it, that there's something better or purer or whatever. But I don't find it valid.
I'm pleased to say I've never come across that writing advice, because it would have upset me terribly, because I love head hopping. It's my favorite thing to do in writing.
And what did you take from what Ekow said?
So I was very interested in the way he strongly feels that he gets better and better. And I was asking myself whether I feel that about my own writing, and I do to some extent, but I think it's a thing to remember and to hold on to as a thing one should aspire to. That one needs to be getting better and better. One needs to be trying different things. One needs to be pushing oneself as a writer. And that feeling of the last book I wrote, or often what I feel the book I'm currently writing is the best book I've ever written, is a real motivating force.
And in terms of writing advice for the week?
Fiona, the editing that I'm doing has made me think very carefully about details. And someone once described writing as a process of time travel, that what you are picturing now in your head, you are trying to project into your future reader's head, and you're trying to get it as exact as possible, almost like a game of Chinese whispers. And if you're going to get that vision in your head into their heads, you have to give the details of what you're seeing. You can't presume that they know that the character's hair is thinning if you don't tell them that the character's hair is thinning. You've got to tell them where they are, what they're seeing, unless you don't mind if they picture it differently. But a lot of what I'm doing at the moment is adding those details so that my picture translates better. And I think it's something to remember when writing.
Yeah, I think that ties in with what I was going to say this week, which has to do with changing perspectives in your narrative. It's not enough that it's just a matter of convenience. So, you have now switched to the head of a 5-year-old because you want to show what's going on in the classroom, and the mother isn't physically in the classroom. So it's just a matter of convenience that you're switching to the 5-year-old. You actually have to occupy that persona of the 5-year-old. You have to change your tone, change your register, change the things that this person is noticing, touching, feeling, experiencing, smelling, very much what you were saying about the kind of time travel thing. You have to occupy that point of view in a convincing way. Otherwise, I mean, perhaps that's why a lot of people don't like head hopping. Perhaps it's not just done very convincingly.
I was going to say it is the challenge of head hopping, that you have to not just obsess yourself with one character. You've got to obsess yourself with several characters and go deep into several characters. And that's a challenge, but it's also a lot of fun.
It's fun to write and it's fun to read.
Absolutely.
So if you have read the work of Ekow Duker, if you have struggled with perspective, if you have struggled with mid-career motivation, which
especially that one, please share these with us.
We need your insights. We are on email, we are on all social media across the board, and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.